Hello.
Our story begins inside of Dooku's meditation chambers. His eyes were closed, his tunic was tight but comfortable enough to bear, and he was at peace. Just earlier this morning, he joined Master Yoda in a lightsaber instruction of younglings. Life was good. Dooku, aged 53 in the year 49 BBY, was preparing to finish training his student Qui-Gon Jinn. He was very proud of his apprentice, but that's not who or what he was thinking about in this meditation. Dooku was focused on the future of the galaxy. His lifelong best friend, Sifo-Dyas, also aged 53, was a much more prophetic visionary, though his visions could be more augury, which left many uncomfortable. Dooku's own sights were more bootless. He didn't particularly mind that either. That's why he was here though, meditating and practicing. The highest prided student of the Grand Master both wanted to experience the Force to a greater degree and lessen his frustrations with the Republic. It was something he promised himself and his student to work on, because the Senate itself had become really vexatious for him. They didn't stop messing things up, and the Jedi were no aid by encouraging it out of fear of another external review. Dooku may have just been a baby when he was brought to the temple, but even as a boy he remembered senators, representatives, and people filling the halls of this remarkable palace. As he remembered hearing from Yoda, this was the people's home. It may have been where the Jedi lived, but they encouraged people to visit them and speak with them. No longer was that the case. The bright halls of the temple, once filled with banners from across the stars, was only dim. Lighting made things lugubrious, and the lack of color from the prideful civilizations that once called this temple home made the Order feel so solemn. He was well understanding that as one grows older, their enjoyment becomes muddled by experiences. He also understood that memories were lambent because everything is awesome when you're a kid. So Dooku wasn't ignorant to that. However, the external review forwarded by Senator Rayancourt in 132 BBY set forth this downward spiral for the Order. The former student of Yoda could come to the conclusion that it was Yoda's or the Council's fault, but he didn't want that to be the case. Dooku just wanted to see the Republic prosper. His outburst on Whale against Senator Daganut several years ago was too far. Qui-Gon often corrected his instructor, which could both be embarrassing and nagging, but he respected his apprentice for being a far greater Jedi than himself. Dooku couldn't stop thinking outwardly, thus forcing his meditation to come to an end. His mind was always as rampant as riptides on the greatest sea planets across the galaxy. He wanted to find his peace, and he was so frequently perturbed by the great inequality that stretched across the stars. As a result of his meditation being interrupted, his last thoughts being on Senator Daganut, that rat bastard from Whale, he tightened his tunic and wrapped his chain cape around his neck and let it fall loosely against his collarbone. As Dooku was leaving, he was surprised by Qui-Gon Jinn. He actually startled his master, but Qui-Gon was excited. He heard that they might be accompanying Master Windu on another mission. Dooku did adore his much younger friend, Mace, so this was certainly something to be excited about. There were some fundamental differences between the two friends, especially their views of the Code and the Republic, but they were great companions. Windu at this point was the 22-year-old Jedi Master, having finished Depa Bilaba's training much faster and efficiently than the Council believed he would. The two of them walked from Dooku's quarters down to the main communication chamber inside the temple. Instead of a mission, which Dooku was actually excited for, himself, they were surrounded by various other Jedi. Masters Ki-Adi-Mundi, Tyvoka, Windu, and a few others were standing quietly. Some had their arms crossed, others were rubbing their chins, and everyone else had some other position they held themselves within. Dooku whispered to Mace, asking what this was about, and he told his friend that the Chancellor was proposing another bill made by the Reduction Committee. Dooku balled his hand into a fist, and Windu patted his friend's arm, hoping that the Senate wouldn't make the decision to support it. The Reduction Committee had been established in the previous administration, under the incorrigible Korlag Chancellor Thoris Daris. This specific committee was created to financially pay the Senate in grand sums, while also reducing protection, rights, finances, and legislation given to Outer Edge territory. In other words, the purpose of this committee was to backstab every single Republic system in danger of escalating crime rates. This was due to encroachment from the criminal syndicates, pirate lords, black markets, and smugglers looking to profit off of Republic neglect. Chancellor Thoris Daris was, at the time, filling his own pockets, while fulfilling his real interests. which included the likes of self-aggrandizement and womanizing. The current administration under Chancellor Frick's leadership wasn't much different. Unabated bureaucratic stagnancy and political corruption continued to wind the Republic closer to obsolescence. Dooku was furious, so much so that even though his friend attempted to comfort him, he walked out of the room before the vote could be passed. He already knew what the Galactic Senate would vote on, and he wasn't going to just watch it. When the vote came through, Mace was the first to leave the communication room. He looked to his friend and they both knew the answer. Windu remained optimistic though. He had faith that the Republic would see the right path. Dooku prepared to challenge this, but debating people without influence over the Republic was not worth his time. Not that he didn't respect Windu's stance, but there was nothing to gain from tireless ramblings about topics that the Republic oversaw from their pretentious chambers. Dooku bowed to his friend and let him pass. Qui-Gon could see the look in his master's eyes, and he tried to discourage whatever he planned on doing, but Dooku would not be swayed, not this time. This did mean that Yoda's student would be visiting him and the council inside of their chambers. They expected it by this point. He didn't show himself after every major bill, but those that he believed enhanced corruption, well, he made an effort to confront the council over it. He walked in with a demeanor that suggested that this was his last straw. The Jedi around the room eyed him as he stood in the middle of their hollowed room. Dooku asked them if they were content with the Republic here, and the council truthfully wasn't. But Dooku by this point needed to understand that they didn't really have a choice in the matter. Defunding necessary outposts and operations across the outer edge of the galaxy could have ramifications costing millions of lives. The council though wasn't empowered to do anything about that. As mentioned before, Senator Rayancourt's external review was the first of many oversights the Senate put over the Order. Because the Jedi were operating within Republic confines, with funding from the government itself, they were on a short leash. 1,000 generations ago, no one ever thought that politicians would get greedy. The High Republic had seen the Republic support the Jedi, but no more. Their political adversaries were increasing every new election, and the truth is, the Jedi had to remain politically favorable. Not that they necessarily wanted to, but they couldn't lose their funding, or they wouldn't be able to do any good in the galaxy. They were between a rock and a hard place. Without funding from the Republic, they'd have more freedoms, but less ability to act. If they remained where they were, which was stagnant, they could at the very least benefit from credits and help people that they could afford to help. The council understood his frustrations, but they had a duty to the Order and their own direction in this path. They couldn't forego any of that in hopes that the Senate would overwhelmingly listen to them. Dooku then finally said something that caught everyone off guard. He proposed that he join the Senate as a representative, a Jedi senator. The council fell silent, and they looked to each other. A couple varying discussions came up. Some of them included removing Dooku from the room so they could talk without his interference. In the end, though, they would actually reject this idea. Voted on by the current council, it was unnecessary. They could lose too much influence if they sent a singular member as their representative. He countered, then suggesting that he join as Serenno's senator, and then he could remain in contact with the Jedi. The council again shot this down. Qui-Gon Jinn was his responsibility. He couldn't just let his student go untrained. Dooku suggested proudly that his student was ready for the trials. The council and Dooku frequently had these type of debates, and it was frustrating. But at least Dooku had some sense of direction this time. Pending Qui-Gon's trial, they would make a final decision. The next few weeks would see Padawan Jinn facing and completing his Jedi Knight trials and becoming a brother to his fellow knights within the Order. It was a prideful and momentous day for him. Dooku was very proud of his student, and he enjoyed celebrating Qui-Gon Jinn's accomplishments, before attempting to sway the voice of the council. Dooku was kind enough to wait until the following day to do this. When he faced them once more, he had even more rationale for doing it. The Republic was trying to protect former Chancellor Thors Darris, because his womanizing habits went too far this time. As any good government does, instead of calling out his barbaric, erratic behavior, they tried to protect it and cover it up. The Jedi, because of Thors Darris' habits, decided to support Dooku as a Jedi Senator, though they were very concerned with this direction and demanded a firm connection from the Senate to the Council was established, so that they could agree on propositions, movements, bills, and whatever he attempted to do. This was their way in keeping control over Dooku while he served in the government. The council would unceremoniously get Dooku his own new office inside the government as a representative of the Jedi Order. Chancellor Frakes was the one who permitted this, though he knew what the political ramifications would be. The Jedi weren't very liked, and Dooku was throwing himself openly into the world of politics at age 53. He'd be entering an entirely different galaxy here. The Senate was not easy on newcomers, especially older ones, and they weren't exactly thrilled to have him in their chambers because he was a Jedi. For as well-rounded as Dooku was with politics and understanding the Republic, he was almost swept away upon joining. The Rhodian senator was quite benevolent towards him, and they helped him get on his own 2 feet. Senator Ola Rusp was one of the individuals within these chambers that still respected the Jedi, and she guided Dooku into some positions to remain favorable as a pro-Jedi politician. She, more than anything, would be the guide Dooku needed for existing inside the Senate. This was a completely different world than just debating fellow Jedi or the Council inside the temple. This would challenge everything Dooku thought he knew, though Ola recommended that he keep his head down for the time being. She understood how much he wanted to change, but patience was pertinent. Ironically, this aligned with how Qui-Gon frequently spoke to his master about his frustrations. Ola was right though. She was a senior senator. She was highly respected, and while her sentiments towards the Jedi made her an enemy to some, she was adored by many. Her influence was what Dooku needed upon entry. A powerhouse ally like her at least gave him a chance to find his legs, before being swept away by the other senators with more anti-Jedi stances. To keep Dooku afloat in the sea of representatives, Ola helped the Jedi Senator into a couple necessary commissions and committees. In sequential order of his acceptance into these groups were the Transformation Committee, the Trade Bracket Commission, and the Trade Oversight Committee, as well as Core Infrastructure Works, Jedi Oversight, Business Advancement, and lastly, probably the most important of these to him, the Piracy and Enslavement Commission. As Dooku had initially suspected, most of these offices were nothing but stagnant bureaucratic nonsense. The Republic was too well funded by tax credits to be filled with such bumbling idiots. Ola did suggest that Dooku be careful to mince his words around certain groups. She brought him up as an apprentice of sorts to her. She was guiding him, so whatever he did would affect her. He promised to behave himself, especially when he wasn't in her presence. Senator Rusp wanted Dooku to quietly observe, take notes, and prepare his own stances accordingly. He might represent the Jedi Order, but like many senators inside these chambers, his alignment didn't necessarily need to represent who put him into that position. It wasn't the most pleasant revelation about the political climate, but Ola was a piece of the last great generation of Republic senators, which wasn't saying much because she, like all the other older politicians, didn't represent those who lived on her planet. They were too old to understand most of the generations from their own home worlds. She may have been a better, more put-together politician than the other elder members in the Senate, but it didn't change the fact of the matter, which was, she was holding a seat that should be held by someone who could relate to most of the local population of her home world, not the last half of the generation that'd be dead soon. Dooku, though, couldn't focus on every minor battle. His mind needed to be drawn to bureaucracy itself, so that he could best correct it. The Transportation Committee was a great place for Dooku to earn favorability in the Senate. Most of their dealings were delegating budgets to infrastructure being sent from the core to the mid-rim, colonies, inner rim, and some outer rim locations. He was able to fit in this role really naturally, and the representatives who served with him were able to see his intelligence, both as a piece of interest and also concern. Many senators believed that the Jedi representative would be inside the Senate for the behalf of the Order, but that wasn't Dooku's orders or his own personal directive. Senators saw how this could be manipulated, or how it could disfavor their own interests to reduce the budget the Jedi had. The two trade-related commissions that Dooku was brought into were more or less contentious. The rise of the Trade Federation, which also followed Senator Rayencourt's external review over the Jedi Order, was debated here. These two groups could forever decide how much influence the Federation and its competitors held in the galactic market. A solid portion of the Republic budget did come from these conglomerates, but Dooku saw that if the Republic were to operate in a more societally beneficial way, then harsher tax codes should be implemented on trade lanes used by these major groups. This was a risky move, but it earned respect and some movement. It didn't get passed, but it became a constant talking point raised by other senators, one of which was Dooku's newest ally, Senator Chandelin. She was also a newer member to the Galactic Republic, previously an ambassador. She served with Dooku on the Piracy and Enslavement Commission, or otherwise known, the PEC, as well. Much of her role was balanced between making sure the conglomerates paid their fair share, while also dedicating as many available resources to regional security forces. The PEC was really a feel-good commission. Like many of Dooku's problems with the Order and the Republic, this commission didn't do a whole lot. It was a fragile part of the government, without any real influence. The Chancellor, even dating back to before Thoris Daris, always kept this commission to prove that they were trying to do something to stop the spread of criminal territory, but every year the budget for the PEC was reduced. They always blamed the other party, and gradually, it would get to a point that people would start dying, and the Republic would remove themselves from the equation to pretend they never had any real power, and the PEC with it would vanish. Chandelin and Dooku had many discussions about the PEC. These discussions included Senior Senator Ola, but nothing could be done about its lack of support, while Dooku had a couple of other ideas, including some of the other groups he had been put into because of Ola. Core Infrastructure Works, or CIW, which covered shipyards at Kuat, Ringo Vinda, Corellia, and so on, had not only a massive budget, but also cut corners. Infrastructure in the core was a big business for the Republic. This committee was tasked with making sure it remained as profitable as possible, which meant that if anyone did some digging, they would learn that the CIW was cutting corners to create apartment complexes. By defunding the PEC and cutting corners, the Senate could make more money, produce housing faster, and leave potential disasters up to the hands of the corporations that built the properties. Because people were fleeing the Outer Rim for safer, non-criminal territory, it was the best way to maximize Republic credits. Of course, the CIW pushed for this, because core citizens paid higher taxes for the safety and security that they had, which ironically wasn't any different aside from location in the galaxy. People paid a premium for the distance they were to Coruscant. That's it. If Hutt territory crept closer, this premium would continue to be exploited. Dooku was furious when he found this out. He couldn't do anything though, because as a member in the Business Advancement and Jedi Oversight Committees, he had more important jobs to fulfill. These two other committees also took up a lot of his time. Business Advancement was a slight counter to the two trade commissions he represented within. It encouraged groups like the Federation to spend more government money for their own technological and therefore financial growth. These corporate demagogues knew this, which is why they played the system until an inflection point presented itself. Jedi Oversight also held the Order by the throat. Dooku saw how much these senators pocketed, and he was threatened by them to remain quiet, or they would out him and his Order for spying and whatnot. This again was proof that Dooku was in a bind. The Republic was almost beyond saving, so much so that he considered stepping down and leaving everything behind. This was horrendous. The Senate and its representatives were blind to what they were doing. They were choking their own citizens out of existence from their suites on Coruscant, and they couldn't even care that it was happening. They'd rather drown in their liquor and please themselves by hurling up food so they can continue stuffing their plush mouths with more. Dooku may have not shown his anger or frustration, but the Council heard it, they saw it, and they considered removing Dooku, but he persisted. After Master Katri was found dead on Raxus Secundus, the now 23-year-old Jedi Master Windu returned to the Council as a member of their ranks. Dooku hoped that true work could be done to change the fate of the crumbling galaxy. Mace was an ally on his side. His optimism might be shattered by these revelations, but Dooku needed someone inside the Council to see what was happening. Someone needed to know that their government was betraying people and letting them suffer for profit. Generations of unchecked power, and now people were dying, people were starving, people were being left behind, and they filled their pockets with more credits than ever before. It was maddening, and Dooku finally, after having spent months with the Senate, had enough. Dooku spent days awake inside of his offices. He shared joint meetings with Senior Senator Ola and her allies, including some other batch meetings with his other greatest ally, Senator Chandelin. Dooku was going to bankrupt the Republic. He was going to force every single one of these greedy bastards out of their seats and transform this government into a functioning entity, and it started with the Trade Defense Council. In another world, This might be called a security council, but in alignment with the Transportation Committee, Business Advancement, and the two major trade commissions, and the underfunded PEC, Dooku was able to gather resources for a defense group, an actual aligned Republic military force to protect trade. Using some legal genius, thanks to hired lawyers, aides, and Republic historians for his office, he concocted the perfect spell for the Senate. The TDC, or Trade Defense Council, was framed as a branch of government to take militaristic assets and resources from the Federation, Union, and other rivaling groups, and use them, as well as the various security forces around the galaxy, to unite and deal with threats to trade, in quotations. It was a brilliant move because, in essence, it was designed to protect Republic credits, not people. Senators, as a result, started to see Dooku in an especially positive light as a response. He wasn't just a Jedi, he was one of them. He wanted credits. He was protecting credits. He was a true Republic senator. Though this council and the bills to support it would theoretically raise a Republic military, without calling it that. The TDC would become the TDF, Defense Force, and it would be propped up by the Republic as necessary for defending trade, and thus the planets within the trade routes. As a result, Dooku forced his hand and leverage with the High Council by suggesting that they start sending knights out to Outer Rim locations, to suggest that people start trading with core-based businesses. Because the TDC and TDF were created to benefit the business advancement sector of the Senate, it meant that people needed to make business transactions that didn't necessarily aid their people. For example, if a planet experienced a food shortage, leadership would not prioritize buying energy generators because food was what they needed. However, if pirates frequently invaded and stole your harvest, then those generators you just ordered from the core were enforced with Republic military personnel. In the early stages, this meant a lot of Republic volunteers would be killed, though this did protect people in Republic Rim territories. So that planet with a food shortage could grow their harvest and still receive protection to a certain degree. It did inevitably force the hand of local leaders to spend money they didn't necessarily have, but it also gave them protection, which was better than nothing. What Dooku wanted to happen, though, came from the introduction and funding of the TDC and TDF. Because the PEC, Piracy and Enslavement, for reminder, wasn't the main focus of the bill, the defense groups got the funding necessary to wage conflict on piracy and enslavement. Dooku knew people would die for this. He understood that Republic marshals would go out and protect shipments, not people, but their natural instincts as sentients would override that. Thus, core-bred citizens would be dying to protect others around these rims. Outcry over these unnecessary deaths would rise. Dooku specifically made people untouched by uneasiness uncomfortable. Since the TDF and TDC were government-created branches, it was encouraged by Dooku's camp and allies that elite citizens who got their children into the defense force would see them progress through Republic ranks. It was written within the bylaws of the actual bills, but essentially there were promises of selective processes, favoritism towards the elite class, and growth within the political system after they joined this military. The people who basically sent their children to die were so blinded by their lust for power that they didn't even catch the drift. It was so meticulously crafted that people from every elite class would send their children for the benefit of political growth. Of course, those children would never see it, and they were sacrifices. There were also some poor people who were upset that their children weren't permitted to join the defense force so they could rise to the ranks, but their cries for equality were silenced by the voices with power. Of course, when those same voices of power lost sons or daughters to Outer Rim thugs, they demanded instant change. All of a sudden, the unimportant PEC became a highlighted focus within the government. Dooku understood that until the people with influence felt the pain, nothing would change, so he forced pain on them. However, he was still madly interested in bankrupting the Republic, because the power structure needed to vanish. Yet, there was another problem. The Jedi Council, while not fully aware of what Dooku was doing to get these people killed, knew that he was doing something against their code. He rebutted these statements. Dooku, by this point, had been a successful senator for a year and a half. He stood before the council and did as he promised he would. the Jedi had an increased budget as a response to the inclining numbers of elite children dying to the Outer Rim. To preface, these weren't actual children, they were young adults, but their parents referred to them as children to give them a sense of innocence, as if these same scummy people hadn't bastardized every single Outer Rim planet for being hit by criminal syndicates. Their sentiment was always, why can't they defend themselves? Now they knew, and now they made themselves the real victims. People were calling for war, and the Jedi Council saw Dooku at the center of all of it. He had shown some signs of the dark side, but Dooku promised his resolve was the same it was when he started. He wanted a more beneficial republic, one that took care of every citizen, and provided the Jedi access to freedoms to act on behalf of the people of the galaxy, not the Senate they claimed to serve. Master Naeselius was wary of this path, and became concerned for Dooku's well-being, suggesting that an ultimatum be provided. Rancis and Ki-Adi-Mundi were of the same camp, that believed that Dooku was participating in political chicanery. His choices were to step down from the Jedi Order and become a senator full-time, or stop being a senator and take a Barash vow to reconnect himself with the Force. Dooku's blood boiled. He didn't look at a single person except Master Yoda, because no one else inside of this chamber had the influence to make this statement gain traction, except for the Grand Master. Oppo and Ki-Adi-Mundi may have been the initial voices, but Yoda was the one who pushed it through. Mace didn't even side with him, because he believed in his friend, who was serving the Republic justly. Without even giving them an answer to his choice, he looked at his former master and told him that the Jedi Council should be less politically active and see what opportunities to do good had presented themselves in his tenure. Dooku stormed out of the room. The Council, despite trying to force his hand, were left with their own choice, and realistically, it wouldn't serve anyone to backstab their senator. Though, for Dooku, it was already too late. The Jedi had just shown him that they were willing to cast him off to maintain their honor to their code. It was a twist of the dagger, but he wasn't bleeding yet. In his eyes, this was just a flesh wound, but he would draft up some documents to completely flood the Jedi out of power, in case they did want to finish the job they started. Young Master Windu took a stand before the Council as the youngest in their history, and told his brothers and sisters that Dooku had done no wrong. If they were aligned with the Republic, then its success, regardless of the form it came in, needed to be respected. He suggested that patience be their best course of action. Mundi did propose that patience could cost more lives, and Windu's rebuttal was that these Republic troopers knew what they signed up to do. They were volunteers. This was not a militaristic draft, it was a volunteer expedition, and every volunteer knew that. Upon returning to the Senate, Dooku's vote was needed to carry out a sentence against the former Chancellor. The courts were left undecided on the former Chancellor Thoris Darris, who had taken his womanizing too far. The trial lasted for a full year, and its conclusion came down to the Senate. Turns out Thoris, despite being a terrible person, had sympathy from the justice. The people who sat in the jury were also hand-picked supporters. Vote went 50-50, after all the evidence of his crimes were laid out. The heinous only got more protected, until Dooku got involved. He voted overwhelmingly to send this fiend to life in prison, or if they were going to let him walk, remove his appendages as payment for the trauma he incurred. Even better, with the backing of Ola before she finally stepped down, and Chandelian, the former Chancellor would have it cut off and then sent to prison. Even better, Dooku paid off a couple inmates to repay a favor. Back inside the Senate, there was yet another problem for Dooku. An individual was attempting to gain his alliance, in the form of Senator Sheev Palpatine from Naboo. The problem is, the Naboo-born senator was very anti-anything Dooku was. He gained a lot of popularity by playing the servant of the Republic. So while most of Dooku's policies were favorable to many, he did it with political manipulation. Palpatine wasn't as interested in faking it to make it. He was everything Dooku despised about the Republic, but he played buddies with the senator from Naboo, because he could be useful someday. Dooku wasn't sure, but he was willing to wait it out and see if anything came from this alliance. Inversely, with Senior Senator Ola Rusp retiring, she was replaced by Danian Farr, father of Anaconda Farr. He was very aligned with Dooku's positions and quickly joined his alliance within the Senate. The next couple of months would see tension continue to rise between Dooku and the High Council. Windu didn't want to break this apart, so he tried to mediate everything, which earned him a lot of respect from individuals like Yaddle. Dooku's biggest struggles were forcing more military bills forward. Ever since the TDF started losing children volunteers, their rich parents had been calling for all-out war. Eventually, the Senate caved, and Chancellor Fricks agreed to support this effort. He sponsored a new bill focused on shipyard production at Corellia and Kuwait. This would be a whole new subcommittee under the branch of the TDC, for naval infrastructure. In this, the Acclamator was born. Unlike its would-be Clone War variant, the one produced by the Republic was an actual warship. It was outfitted with heavy cannons and shields to defend invasions. Even further, another subcommittee for troop recruitment would be created, now allowing non-elite children to join their ranks. The Republic military started to grow, and as a result, people were finally getting their much-needed protection. Dooku, seeing this as his chance to earn more support for humanitarian work, requested that the Jedi Council host a gala inside the temple. Mace Windu, taking initiative, supported this. He was born long after the banners were hoisted in the halls of the temple, but he would finally see what Dooku remembered from his boyhood: the Jedi Temple in its greatest elegance. Some of the richest donors, senators, and business people would join Dooku inside the temple. This was an adult-only event, but many of the visitors adored the younglings on their way to their nighttime classes. This was the first time in generations that hundreds of outsiders entered the temple at once. There was food, liquor, music, and speeches given by Dooku and his allies. Palpatine and Plagueis were the first Sith since Darth Xana to enter these hallowed halls, but Palpatine started to realize that he and Plagueis needed to figure out how to stop this Republic unification with the Jedi. The two Sith spoke with counselors and hid their identities as best as they could, while Dooku enchanted the audience with his flair for the spotlight. He was built for this, and Yoda watched his student shine like a star. The event would be a massive success. The Jedi were gifted more legislative and financial power, including some extra resources to aid in humanitarian efforts. Dooku was able to also start up a huge deal for venture capital. Sensing the frustrations of the conglomerates due to not showing up, he decided to encourage his wealthy friends to diversify their assets. The major power players in the business field weren't able to operate as mysteriously with Republic warships and cruisers defending trade routes. This allowed the Senate to tax them more because actual transportation numbers were being reported, not faked, and they were much higher on average than these businesses had claimed them to be for years. The Sith started to try and plan around this, because it was quite annoying, but they couldn't really do anything to stop what was already started. With information that the powerful businesses were scheming, it forced the Republic to implement policies that deeply impacted them, which also included a complete withholding of all military assets created by these groups. Because there was a continually growing Republic military, one with a projected 23 million new troops, there was no need, realistically, for the Federation and its rivals to have defense forces. A deal wasn't agreed to, but forced by the Senate, and the Federation was only permitted to have specific surface-level cannons. Heavy turbo lasers were not permitted. Palpatine and Plagueis played things close to the chest as they tried to navigate this space. Dooku had made things impressively difficult for them. However, his original plans for bankrupting the Republic would fall through. This would take a couple of years to see come to fruition, but during that time, he'd continue his attempts at bankrupting the Republic. He believed his cause was admirable, and many senators and representatives joined him, not knowing of his true intentions. During this time, there would also be more turbulence inside the council chambers, when Yoda would step down from the seat, appointing Windu to serve in his place as the next Grand Master. By the year 40 BBY, the Republic was forever shifted. Dooku's push for conflict in the Outer Rim came with many successes, but not the ones he anticipated. Thanks in part to Sith not having visions of a great war, and Dooku refusing any pushes from Hego Damas II and Palpatine, there were a variety of failed Sith plans. To start, their Kaminoan operation was turned against them. The Republic made it illegal for non-Republic personnel to militarize, due to the expansiveness of their Trade Defense Force, which was transformed into Republic Regions Military, or RRM, consisting of a fully outfitted navy headed by acclamator destroyers and ground troops, with actual armor and weaponry. When the Sith attempted to bribe the Kaminoans, they told the Sith that they would think on the issue, before then reporting everything back to the Jedi Council about it. The Sith were almost caught, but eventually never were. Following that debacle and a few other failed attempts for power, like a bid for the Chancellor's race, Sidious attempted to betray his master. The push for Palpatine to become Chancellor was hindered because of the Trade Federation. They didn't have any power to blockade Naboo, thanks to rollbacks, bills, and amendments created to demilitarize the corporate sector. The Republic profited off of this immensely. As a side note, because all the research done for military growth was swallowed up by the government and pushed into the RRM. As for the Sith, Palpatine, frustrated with the continuous failure, attempted to kill his master, with his own apprentice. Plagueis would wrangle Sidious and provide Maul a choice, to surrender and join him, or die. Zabrak, young warrior, would join Plagueis. This would eventually see the Sith Order as a religious sect crumbling. Plagueis the Wise became frustrated with the perpetual failure that engulfed the Sith, and to avoid a falling out with the Jedi, decided to focus on his fascination with the Force instead. Maul would become an aid to that, and eventually they would accidentally create Skywalker, when the Force reacted to their dark practices. They would never be found by the Jedi, and never be killed by them. The Republic military, on the other hand, was the real hero of the last 8 years. Dooku's little project to bankrupt the entire Republic actually made them more financially independent than they ever would have been otherwise. It was an impossibly large difference from the outcome Dooku initially wanted. However, it made him and the Jedi look like heroes of the new era. Part of the financial freedom came from the free market that encouraged competition. Without domineering powerhouses like the Federation maintaining control over trade and Republic interests, little guys were able to participate. This also encouraged new technological advancements. This was success gained from the venture capitalists gathered at the Jedi Gala. An added benefit of the freer market was the stability in constant commerce, and the Republic's direct pull away from the banking clans. They were so close to obtaining power over the Republic, but Dooku issued requests to pay off all Republic debts with assets acquired in the conflict with the Outer Rim. As an added note, and the greatest irony about the last 8 years of conflict is it was really a Cold War, with an odd battle here or there. More or less, planets seceded from Hutt or Syndicate territory, with hopes to join the Republic. Natural benefits and resources from these planets became bartering tools for permission to join the Republic itself. Dooku proposed many military bills, mostly to bankrupt the Republic, but the expansion of the Core Infrastructure Works Committee was his pride and joy. When it became clear that detonating the Republic economy wouldn't work, he transformed the CIW into the Galactic Infrastructure Committee. It was redesigned and incorporated into the Transportation and Business Advancement Commissions to further assist integration for formerly Syndicate-controlled worlds. It was never an easy process, and it would take years for these systems to receive proper representation. However, there was a parting gift that Dooku passed to the Senate, thanks to Danian Farr and Chandelian, which was the Senator and Representative Term Limit Amendment, further making it impossible for lifelong politicians to attempt to hoard power for themselves. And the greatest irony in all of this, as he entered his 60s and stepped away from the Senate, Dooku's longtime ally on the Council, Grand Master Windu, proposed a new position for his friend, the role of Master of the Order and guide to every new Jedi Senator, something Dooku would openly accept. His vision for the galactic market included blowing up the system. Instead, he transformed bureaucracy to stagnate the Sith out of existence. It wasn't clean or flush, but the messy system Dooku loathed now worked, for the people of the Republic, which now included every sector of the galaxy. If it weren't for his greatest advisor, Senator Ola Rusp, or the allies he made along the way, the Republic wouldn't be entering the first Golden Era scene in centuries. And that, my friends, is another Star Wars C-SPAN story. Again, special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about Star Wars C-SPAN, the story. So, you guys love these stories. I love them too, honestly. They're so much fun to write. I don't know what happens when I start writing these. I don't know. I love these stories. They're so much fun. And I'm glad you guys like them too. This story, I wanted to be different than the Padme beats Palpatine, than the Anakin Senator of Tatooine, and from the Yoda integrating the Republic and Jedi into one sect videos. I wanted this story to sit as its own. I wanted Dooku's intentions to be what they are in canon, to destroy the Republic. I think he's politically intelligent enough to pull this off. I think Dooku would struggle more just because of the time he's at, and unlike Padme, he is a Jedi. But I think once he showed his cards as a more quote-unquote corrupt politician seeking more financial growth for the Republic, I think he'd be able to remove himself from the idea of just a Jedi. A lot of what he does is unintentionally set up the Republic to be more financially stable without influence from the banking clans, for example, which is why he pays off their debts with assets they acquire from the Outer Rim. A lot of this is Dooku just transforming his own view on what he intended to do and then making it something that can actually benefit society as a whole. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. Dooku is always so fun to write, so I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.